Welcome to the Experience Strategy Podcast, where we talk to customers and experts about how to create products and services that feel like time well spent. And now, here are your hosts, experienced strategists, Dave Norton and Aranza Savas.
Welcome to the Experience Strategy Podcast. I'm your host, Aranza Savas.
And I'm Dave Norton.
And today, Dave and I are joined by Dr. Paul J. Zak. He's a PhD, professor of economics, psychology, and management at Claremont Graduate University in California. He's ranked in the top 0.3% of most cited scientists with over 170 published papers. Paul has helped start several interdisciplinary fields, including neuroeconomics, neuromanagement, and neuromarketing, and is a regular TED speaker, four-time tech entrepreneur, and corporate consultant. His work has been groundbreaking in academic, public sectors, and now in business and healthcare settings. His new book, Immersion, The Science of the Extraordinary and the Source of Happiness, is a discussion of how the world is rapidly transforming into something that you've heard us talk about an awful lot since the genesis of this show, the experience economy. And Paul really is exploring our work in the experience economy as well as the broader experience economy as he looks at what creates cravings for truly extraordinary and unforgettable experiences. He's shown that there's a scientific formula to consistently create these extraordinary experiences. And we're hoping that he'll share that with all of us who aim to create extraordinary, memorable, and truly transformative experiences every day. Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Aranza. Thanks, Dave.
So, Paul, I gave the briefest introduction to your work in this new book. Tell us a bit more about what you're focused on lately.
Right. So the work is based on about 20 years of research, measuring activity from 50,000 brains, while people do a whole variety of experiences to try to identify what makes an experience extraordinary. So as you both know, when we ask people about their experience, it's very difficult for them to articulate how good it is. So how good is, how much do I like my phone relative to what? Relative to my kids? I actually forget my kids. They talk back to me. Relative to my dog's perfect, right? So these are just not comparable things. So we started doing this work early on in the War on Terror. We were funded by the U.S. Department of Defense to identify signals in the brain that together would accurately and consistently predict what people would do after a message or an experience. And after millions of dollars of taxpayer money and client money, we were able to find a set of signals in the brain that appear to capture the value the brain places on experiences. And once you have that measurement tool, then you can ask a lot of very interesting questions.
Oh my gosh, that sounds so amazing. And it sounds like you have done an incredible amount of research that those of us that are in research, we envy the access that you've had, the ability that you had. Not that I could ever do what you're doing. I don't think I could pull that off, but just sounds like a tremendous opportunity to study something that is so important.
Thanks for saying that. There's a secret underneath this. Well, there's a couple secrets, but one of the secrets is about 6 years ago, because Dave, you know that I'm a cheap bastard and neuroscience is expensive. We built a platform so that anybody could measure what the brain loves in real time by applying algorithms to smartwatches and fitness sensors. So because the brain is embodied and the cranial nerves, I think this is the brain's output file, pass through the heart, we can work backwards and have published research showing using pharmaceuticals that we can actually trace out these pathways. So we can infer what your brain is doing by feeding in very subtle signals that we can pick up from standard heart rate sensors. So dumb wearables, smart cloud, took a long time to get the mathematics worked out. But that means we have, hundreds of people every week basically collecting data for us. And so that's the unfair advantage we have as a platform. But it means also from the book's perspective and for this conversation, so many interesting people have measured neurologic immersion, this state that I discovered that is this evaluation mechanism for experiences, in ways I would never have thought of, and oftentimes share that data with me. And therefore, we have so much more. We have an army of people doing research for me. So that's the short story on the secret sauce.
That's the goal, isn't it? To find ways to gain credible passive insights. So you mentioned neurological immersion. Let's start there. What do you mean by that?
Right. So just for background, in my lab, we almost always start these, multi-year, decade-long research programs. So looking at changes in neurochemicals in blood. So just so people understand, how we discover this, we do a blood draw, we give you an experience, and we do another blood draw. After the experience, we give you the option, but don't require that you do something. So again, I'm in the prediction business, not in the feeling business. I want to know what people do, not what they say or think or feel, because those are all just too vague for me. So we, for example, use public service announcements. So you watch some video about kids with cancer. We take blood before and after. We pay you because we're torturing you. At the end, we say, by the way, if you want to donate some of the $40 you earn to St. Jude Children's Hospital, you can do that or not. You can do it privately. So we compared brain activity for people who did something after experience versus those who didn't. So the presumption here is that since, we're all kind of lazy, our brains are lazy, if you were provoked to actually do something, then that activity in your brain must have been saying that this is really important to you. So what is the difference between those brains? And that tells us where to look for electrical activity in the brain, which we can pick up 1,000 times a second. So we looked at about 140 signals in the brain and winnowed these down until we identified these two core components that I'm calling neurologic immersion. And the first is attention, right? I can either attend consciously here or somewhere else. I can't attend to both. So that's not at all interesting. If I'm not present, it's not going to be a great experience. Mm-hmm. But most of the second by second variation in immersion is due to what I call emotional resonance. That's the value that my brain gets from this experience emotionally. And so this combination of attention, which is associated with the release of dopamine, and emotional resonance associated with release of another neurochemical, oxytocin, have this very interesting dance and create this pattern second by second that tells us in this very granular way how much the brain values this experience. And the cool thing is, because we have a platform, this is out of the lab. This is in the wild. So, people are measuring immersion while customers shop, while employees do their jobs, while people are in classrooms, on and on and on. And so, yeah, it gets to be very exciting. And from that, of course, we derive some general principles.
It sounds really important that this be contextually sourced. So how do you find context shifts that response?
Restate the question. But I don't know what context shift is. Sorry.
Yeah. So you were asking people, or you're receiving this data. I guess there's not really a question involved in it, but you're receiving this data in the moment that people are having the experience rather than before or after the experience. Why is that important?
Oh, great question. First of all, we get a baseline. So everyone's baseline physiology is different. So let's use a concrete example. One of the longest and public users of the Immersion platform is Accenture. So Accenture, big public services organization, they spend about $1 billion a year training their employees to create more value for the organization. And all they had prior to using our platform was that survey that we've all done. How did you like the training you did? Was the lunch okay? Did you like the keynote speaker? Again, I don't care about any of that. I want to know, did that information shake up your brain so much that that information is stuck in the brain, and then you can use it later, again, to create value for the organization. And so immersion strongly correlates with information recall, because as you both know, information that is tagged emotionally as important is saved in the brain in a very particular way. Right? Birth of a child, wedding, 9/11, all those are easily recalled. And so by measuring immersion during training, Accenture has an objective and granular metric that identifies if that training is in fact effectively creating value for the organization. Is it sticking in your brain? And so because of that, they have made a lot of changes. For example, they have found that individuals, no matter how good a speaker is, like Dave, no matter how exciting you are, Dave, I cannot stay immersed in a conversation with you for more than about 20 minutes. So immersion is metabolically costly. That's one way we identify it. Your brain's putting a lot of energy into, processing this experience. And when it does that, it gets fatigued. Neurons fatigue just like muscles fatigue. And so they have broken up their training into 20-minute modules. So no one speaks for more than 20 minutes. And then they switch tasks. And then they do, say, 20 minutes of table work. And then they switch tasks, maybe 20 minutes of a debrief by table. And then they've also found that breaks need to be longer because, again, we're really asking people to be fully metabolically engaged in this experience. And so I think that carries over to lots of different experiences, which is kind of short and intense is better than long and drawn out, right? Hit me hard, hit me fast, give me something to do. And what's interesting, I think, about immersion is because it's so generates all this metabolic energy, it's like tension in a story. So I think one reason that immersion very accurately predicts what people do after an experience is because you put all this tension in me. And now if you have a call to action, I want to do that thing. I want to buy, I want to share, I want to post on social media, whatever that is. You've got me so excited about this thing, I'm ready to go. So one more concrete example. So a lot of advertisers have used our space to optimize marketing materials. And so, for example, Super Bowl ads. And, all those go on TV and then, a week later or some days even before the Super Bowl, they're put on YouTube. And some of those ads are fabulous. Some are terrible, but some are fabulous. And they don't have the $15 an hour intern after you've immersed me on YouTube, put a link to say buy now. Right, to me, that's a complete waste, right? Like, I'm so excited. Oh my gosh, the best new tennis shoes ever. I want these things. And you just dissipated that energy. Right, exactly right. So once we immerse people, we really want to give them a chance to act on that.
Hey, Paul, for the record, Aransas is far more interesting to listen to as a public speaker than I am.
25 minutes.
But I love your definition of what your immersion is, where you said it's metabolic engagement. I don't know if you meant to say that or not, but for me, that's where it clicked. It was like you're studying engagement at the metabolic level. We always talk about engagement at the level of verbal interaction, like you described before. Because our tools are our ability to ask questions and to get people to respond to those questions. Maybe we can do some exercises along the way. Maybe we can watch them to see if they seem to be worried or track their eye movement. But when you talk about immersion, you're talking about what's happening at a metabolic level that shows that they're in fact engaged with the information that's being provided. That's astounding. And I also love this, you're still using a pre-post kind of an approach, right? You take the blood before, you take the blood after, you have stimulus in between, which is kind of a classic methodology, I think, for any type of transformational research that people are trying to do. Like it's one thing to ask people their opinions after they've finished an experience, but you don't get to see the change that occurred unless you do pre, during, and post type of assessment. So that for me really clicked when you described that.
And maybe post, right? Looking at that, I love the transformation work. We found recently that since we can measure now at 1 second frequency all day, that we can use these data to identify people's mood with 98% accuracy and their energy. So these are in vulnerable populations where employees who face high levels of chronic stress or people in retirement homes who don't get a lot of social interaction. That in fact, the data are extremely rich And so it's really looking at that long-term transformation. So could we use these data to create interventions so that people do not hit these mood troughs and head into depressive symptoms, but really have the ability to live complete, flourishing lives? And I think that's the big arc of all my work is let's create amazing experiences for people and then build up that neurologic capability to be fully present, to be emotionally open, to improve the quality of the experiences and social interactions we have. And I think that's consistent with your work. I mean, let's really give people these extraordinary experiences and give them an opportunity to grow, because we don't get that many extraordinary experiences.
It's so true. And you've created this scientific formula that can help us consistently create and deliver extraordinary experiences. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So again, I'm always trying to sort of take everything we've learned and simplify it down to something that's useful. So there's really 5 steps. The acronym is SIRTA, CERTA, like being certain that you're going to have create a great experience for somebody. So very briefly, the S is for staging. I want to create a space where you're psychologically safe. You have the neural bandwidth to really be immersed in the experience. The I is for immersion. And as you guys know, the most effective way to immerse an individual is using storytelling, right? So having a human scale story with authentic emotions, with crises that resolve, that's the way humans as social creatures learn most effectively. So have an immersive story that's consistent with the overall topic you're trying to talk to them about. R is for relevance. So there's not one universal story, although we could have a debate on that, but a story that's targeted on me. So you may show me an ad for diapers with cute babies and big eyes, but if I don't have infants at home, it's just my brain just flushes that out. So, okay, that was fun. It wasn't transformative. But if I have infants, I'm like, oh, Huggies on sale, 25% off. That's important. It's really relevant to me. So it's really optimizing that experience for that audience. Pine and Gilmore call this customization at scale. So this is really customizing at scale.
Yep.
The T is for targeting. So we often find when we measure a broad swath of individuals in experience that we have superfans who are unexpected. So there's really valuable intel when you can identify superfans neurologically, because these superfans not only will act on the experience, the call to action, they will work on your behalf. They have absorbed this experience so powerfully that they want to tell other people about them. They will post on social media. They'll use word of mouth. So engage those superfans by targeting those individuals and asking them for help. And then lastly, the A is for action. So you've got to have a call to action there, implicit or explicit. When that call to action occurs at an immersion peak, it's more likely to be followed. So oftentimes we see, for example, in storytelling, we close the narrative arc. So we have rising tension, resolving tension, and then at the end, like in a commercial, there's some call to action when actually the immersion is low. What we really want to do is have the call to action at that emotional peak. That's when I'm most metabolically engaged, as Dave said. And so that's when I want to have that call to action. So don't always close the narrative arc, right? Hold it open a little bit, let it kind of percolate and have the opportunity for people to really live in that emotional state and go, oh my gosh, I have to do this thing.
I love it. I love it. I love the way that you describe getting to that emotional peak. We've talked a lot about the peak and rule, and I know that's something that you're very familiar with as well. But what you're kind of describing is something where, because you're monitoring them, you can determine the exact fit for that particular individual, rather than just what you've kind of prescribed in the experience to be where you think the peak is going to happen and where you think the end is going to happen.
Yeah, I think the other distinction in what you're saying, Paul, though, that jumped out to me is that the peak end rule is really about creating memorable experiences. And what you are distinguishing, I think, is creating activated or activating experiences. So those that aren't just memorable, but drive change.
I think those are very closely correlated. So memorable experiences often drive change, if not immediately, then longer term, right? So I have this amazing experience, this branding experience, say live, and then I go into the store and I see that same logo, hear that same music, right? It pulls out that emotional memory. I go, oh yeah, I got to buy this thing. That's great. So again, a concrete example of that is sort of customization scale. We have a subscriber in Cincinnati that creates live brand experiences for well-known clients. And they will give each individual a wearable, and then they will actually customize that experience and go, hey, when you're walking through our brand experience for company X, you love this part on. And so they actually have that conversation in real time. And so now we have a chance to see what people really value the most, not only kind of creating on average this kind of high immersion experience, but for you as an individual. Let's talk about that. We have another client that has uses for home shopping, which is very interesting, right? Like, oh, sir, you really love the kitchen. Do you do most of the cooking? I literally was with a client walking this through, and this guy, like he was off the charts for immersion at the kitchen. And then the wife goes, oh yeah, he's the cook in the family. Like the kitchen's really important to him. Awesome. That's great. Let's talk about the kitchen. Why is this important to you? Do you spend most of the time in the kitchen in the breakfast nook, or do you actually use the dining room? And it changes that whole conversation. And it is kind of mind reading in a way, right? But it's more like kind of emotion reading or value reading. So I think it's an interesting conversation. And from the end users, the customer's perspective, they are blown away. Like, oh, holy crap! How'd you know I love the kitchen? I'm like, well, we're watching your immersion. Yeah, you agreed to wear some wearables, and we're going to share the data with you. So total transparency. There's no surreptitious data collection, and there's no brainwashing. All I can do is say, this is the stuff that was super awesome to you. Let's discuss.
Arances, this reminds me of the work that we've been doing around personal fry tags. And I don't know, Paul, if you know what a fry tag diagram is, but it's based on Gustav Freytag's framework, starting, the climax of the experience, the denouement, and the end. And so one of the things that we've been articulating is that with artificial intelligence, with some of the other technologies that are coming on board, one should be able to personalize that experience in such a way that whatever is their peak moment for them, you described it as for that particular individual, is when he's at the cooking booth, he gets to see some of the things that he's really interested in. But that's his peak moment, and you see it. That, for me, is this idea of a personal Freytag diagram, being able to map how the experience actually occurred for the individual.
And I think what's lovely about that is the individual doesn't always know that himself or herself. So the signals we're getting are deep in the brainstem, well out of conscious awareness. So we have kind of an inkling of this. But back in the home buying space, we found, looking at this couple shopping at different homes, that the wife and this couple was over the moon about a house that was really run down. It was almost a tear down, but it needed a lot of work. And when I showed her data, she started crying. And she said, oh, I do love that house because it reminds me of the house I grew up in. Mm. And my mother just passed away. And 2 weeks ago, my father put the house up for sale. And what was beautiful is that her husband, who was just a sweet guy, he goes, oh, honey, if you love this house, let's get this house. And their immersion was much higher for a different house. But, it's such an interesting conversation to get at that emotional level. And they ended up not buying that house because it needed so much work. But, there was something that was just so beautiful. And also I feel terrible. I give her a hug. I'm like, I'm sorry. I didn't know it was so important to you. She goes, no, it's okay. I'm just kind of dealing with it. So I think if we can create those extraordinary experiences, not that we need to make people cry, but like, this was so valuable to me that I'm going to remember it. I want to repeat it. I'm going to act on it. Right? That's exciting.
So, Paul, one of the things that I find really exciting about your approach to this work is, we've all seen the effect of wearables on big players like cruise lines and Disney, and the way they are using those individual insights to create truly immersive, individualized journeys. But by translating that into a recipe, you've made these insights accessible to a much broader range of organizations. So not everybody's going to have the resource or the technology to monitor every step a customer takes in the journey. But I think what you're saying is by using this sort of the factors within it, we are able to, even in our local pizzeria, start to
and
create a more meaningful journey.
That's my immersion right now. I'm measuring right now. So that line is I'm off camera. I'm a little bit, I don't know. So that frowny thing means I'm a little bit below my baseline. I got a baseline. In the background is my psychological safety. So I think you're right. I think
okay, wait.
principles.
Back up. What are you talking about here?
I'm measuring the value my brain's getting from this experience right now, which is actually pretty high. That smile means relative to my baseline, I'm getting more neurologic immersion talking to you. And the background is my psychological safety. I'm in summer. I'm very comfortable. I'm relaxed. You guys are awesome. And if it were fall or winter, I'm more stressed. So this is a valuable experience for me. And so I think by having that tool, we do have two things around. So, right, we have these sort of general principles. How do I create a customer journey or an employee experience that is extraordinary? And the second is once we have a tool, then we can actually ask really detailed questions like Dave mentioned, like how do I customize this at scale so that you have this amazing Freytag triangle customized for you? And I think that's where this is going. And because immersion correlates with how much people enjoy an experience, then, as you said in the opening around, it creates a craving to repeat it. Like, this blew my mind. This was amazing. This is something I want to do again and again. So that dopaminergic attentional response puts in that craving, just like a craving for a drug driven by dopamine. Like, hey, I want to do these things again, right? SeaWorld or Disneyland or whatever that was, or, shopping at, who knows, Barney's was so amazing that I want to come back and do this again. And much of that is the storytelling and the people, right? So again, we haven't talked much about employee experience, but if I want to help employees create an extraordinary experience for customers, employees they got to love it. They got to be turned on. They've got to be well trained. They've got to have some autonomy and discretion because each customer is going to be a little different. And what's really cool about immersion is it's contagious. So if that salesperson is authentically excited about what they're doing, they're not just schmoozing to make a sale, but they're like, I love working here because we transform people's lives every day, and they tell you how that transformation can happen, then that immersion is contagious. And we've actually seen this in a lot of use cases where a customer service agent is measuring their immersion, and that data predict not only who will buy, but how much they will buy. I know.
Oh, interesting.
That is
this
rad.
That is
our
totally
deep
rad.
social nature. Yeah.
I want to point out something else that was rad, which is Paul compared listening to the Experience Strategy podcast to going to SeaWorld, which I think is a very positive thing, man. Like we're on the same level as some of these amazing events. But one of the things that, that was a joke. But one of the things that I think you just triggered for me is that maybe this tool shouldn't just be in the hands of the companies. It should be in the hands of the individuals themselves. So it's about me having control. The difference we distinguish between personalization and individualization. Personalization is where the company says they know you. Individualization is where the company says we empower you to know yourself. And so why not give the customer the same tools that you're using so that they can provide the input, right? I just see a tremendous opportunity there. You're doing it because you're the owner of the company, but why not me? Why not somebody else?
Right. I
Right?
mean, well, I think to Paul's point, he said, I'm aware of these insights that I might not otherwise be aware of these factors that are shifting biologically for me in these moments. So yeah, what does happen when we have a greater sense of self-awareness about what turns us on and what doesn't?
So we should tell listeners that we didn't prep before this. Dave, you get an A+ from the professor for that question. So next week, we are launching our first consumer-facing app so that anybody can measure their neurologic immersion in real time for free. Take it with you, carry it around so that you can measure that, and it will sync to your calendar so you can see hour by hour, minute by minute, what's giving me the most value in my life. And so it really gets to my overall research focus on helping people flourish. Give me more of the exciting stuff and let me start avoiding the stuff that's just frustrating and is not really valuable to me. So to the extent we can, this life always is full of frustrations. But if I really know, as Aranza said, if I really know that SeaWorld or this podcast or whatever is valuable to me, give me more of that, right? And again, let me develop that muscle in my brain, if you will, mixed analogy there, but let me develop that brain capacity to be really fully immersed in experience. And oftentimes we are not. And I think that's why extraordinary experiences are so important, both from an economic perspective, but also from a human perspective. They really drive up our long-term life satisfaction when we have these amazing experiences. Give a concrete example. I was on a train in England with my daughter years ago. She was 15, and we're going to go to Stonehenge. So, from London to Stonehenge is a couple of hours. And I was talking about the most amazing meals I'd had in my life and what cities I was in and why I was there. And one of those was in Amsterdam and one was in Bogota. And she, after this little story, she said, Dad, I don't think it was the meals. I think it was the experience. And I think she was exactly right. The food is not separatable from this amazing place I was and the people I was talking to and the reason I was there and, the whole gestalt around that. So if those were sufficiently valuable to me, why don't I do more of that, right?
Yes. Well, and it's a quantified addition to the process of reflection. And so I do a lot of work in self-awareness, and in our work specifically, we frequently encourage our clients to build in moments of reflection to deepen meaning. And I think there is such an interesting potential here to merge this quantified self-reflection with this felt sense of engagement, and to see what themes emerge. Kind of to your daughter's point, she probably noticed the trends in your storytelling, and that's what led her to that assessment of value. And so what happens if those come together? Do we see where they diverge, where they converge, and use that then to help us decide, to your point, what do I want more of and less of in my daily life?
Yeah. So I do think
and then you use this data, I assume, to boost your own understanding.
We do. I mean, once we have people on the platform, it's not my data, it's their data. So unless you share it with me, I'm not going to see it. But but people can use their own data to kind of move up that satisfaction pathway in life. So I think that's really exciting. And don't we all want to live more fulfilled, satisfied lives?
Yes.
And much of that is our relationships, are what we're doing actively. So if I was at the shopping mall this weekend, I went with my daughter. I didn't go by myself. Now I could go by myself and I may still have a great experience, but it's a lot more fun when that experience involves others. So takeaway number one is, full stop, every experience that includes a social layer is more immersive. And so, the humans, can add value to life. It's not always. Sometimes humans cause frictions, right? But, really think about accentuating that experience with people you care about, or sometimes people you don't even know at all. And if I put you in an environment where extraordinary things can happen, then we can have these amazing experiences.
This is
and we'll
really
pay for
exciting.
them. And we'll pay for them, which is also super.
We will pay for
and it's okay, right? There's no moral bad about paying for an extraordinary experience, right? If I'm going to go to Disneyland, I'm happy to pay because it's just going to be amazing an experience.
Yes. That's
Yeah.
right. And I would so much rather return to that experience, because I do think so much of what you're talking about is not just trial, but loyalty.
Yeah, so it's really driving up customer lifetime value. If I can give you an
Mhm.
extraordinary experience consistently, then again, I create that craving to return. I become a super fan. I really want to be involved in this experience. And because of that, I'm willing to continue to pay for it. So again, it doesn't mean that one bad experience or one mediocre experience means I'm never going to go back to your store. But it does mean that I have an obligation as a business to continue to innovate so that that extraordinary experience does not wear off in its value. So even in these places we've talked about, Disneyland, we've measured, and they're extraordinary because they combine storytelling with novelty, which the brain loves. So even that, they continue to innovate, right? They have new lands, they have new rides, they have different restaurants. And so adding in that a little bit of newness to an experience also tends to drive up its immersion.
Yeah, absolutely. And gives people an invitation to share the value of their experience and create that influence.
Yeah.
I want to talk about this all day, but I hear you in my mind saying we can only pay attention for so long. So I guess we have to end this episode and then figure out more reasons to chat with you in other conversations. I'm super excited to hear what you learn from this B2C product that you're launching now. Where do we find that?
You can find that at getimmersion.com. So immersion with an I. The information coming out soon. And people can engage with me as much as they like. You can find me online and email me. So what an honor to be on with both of you. Thank you so much for having me, and hope I've created a little bit of value for you and for listeners.
I think so. I mean, Dave and I are beaming. I think if we had the little app that you had right now, it would be showing a high degree of engagement and excitement. Quick recaps here. So what I have in terms of key takeaways for us, for all of you listening: number one, go to getimmersion.com to keep learning about this and hear more about Paul. But also this CERTA, so staging, which we know so much about. Joe Pine, as you know, is a partner in our organization and our frequent collaborator. So we spend a lot of time talking about staging, immersion, relevance, which I think from a motivation standpoint is so relevant. Targeting, so creating these neurological superfans, which I feel like we need another episode just to explore that one topic. And then active, right? So translating, and this is something I'm just really passionate about in all of my work, is I feel like we get so many sources of content and inspiration and idea, but most of them fail to translate into activation. So that's where we really try to distinguish this show and all of our work, is taking ideas and excitement and energy and translate them into doing, so that something is different as a result. So I really love that you include that in there at the peak moment specifically. Dave, you're all turned on by this conversation too. What are you taking home?
Oh man, I'm thrilled. I can see all kinds of opportunities to collaborate with you guys. Would love to do some collaborative work with your team. We're doing some interesting work on modes that I think would be really improved by the work that you're doing. I think it's fascinating just to hear your story, Paul. You started by taking blood pre-post. Now you can use wearables and light sensors to do the same type of a thing, and you can do it every second. That's amazing what you've been able to accomplish, and I'm super excited to see where this goes. I think people really want this type of data for themselves, and I think companies would be it would behoove companies to not focus just on what they can do to their customers, but how they can share that data with their customers so that their customers feel more empowered themselves. I think over the long run, you're going to get away. You're not going to have to deal with creepiness or other types of issues if you're being transparent. Such a fun conversation. Those are some of my takeaways.
Awesome.
Amen, brother. That's perfect. We're just empowering individuals.
Yeah. And we are seeing it just from, I know you study economics as well. We are seeing such a difference in those companies that are actively working as partners for their customers instead of trying to play the hero and be the only owner of insight for that customer. So I do think this is something that we'll see more and more companies embrace in their experience strategies over the coming years. Well, let's continue this conversation down the road. For all of you listening, thank you for being here. Join in on this conversation by reaching out to any one of us or visiting us at theexperiencestrategypodcast.com, on LinkedIn, all the places. This is the future, and it is accessible to all of us, no matter what our team size or resources. We can create greater meaning and greater engagement with our customers. It is our challenge to be valuable. And these are resources that are available to support us in accomplishing that in more meaningful ways. Thank you for listening. Paul, thank you for being here.
Thank you for listening to the Experience Strategy Podcast. If you're having fun nerding out with us, please follow and share wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Find more episodes and continue the conversation with us at experiencestrategypodcast.com.